Today I'd like to talk about American unity. I'm sure you've heard people talk about the ideas of American unity or bipartisanship, but that talk often rings hollow because the person saying it is a politician who speaks in broad, patriotic terms, but then ends up partaking in the very actions they claim to be against. So today I'd like to go into depth on this issue and talk about ways in which we can actually help to solve the problem. Before I go on, I'd like to define unity, so that it's clear what it is I mean when I say that. Being unified doesn't mean we should all be marching to the same beat. Our ability to disagree and debate is what makes us free and strong. But beneath those disagreements should be respect and a sense of commonality. If our country is united, that simply means we are all committed to bettering our country, and we recognize and appreciate the value of our fellow citizens, despite any philosophical or ideological differences we may have. This idea of unity is present in our founding documents and our everyday lives. The Latin phrase e pluribus unum, which means out of many, one, is written on our coins. The Constitution begins with the phrase, "We the people of the United States," in order to form a more perfect union. And the Declaration of Independence ends with the words, "We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor." This sense of unity has pushed us forward and kept democracy strong over the last 200 years. But as much as our founders liked to talk about cooperation and respect, American politics has rarely been civil. Thomas Jefferson, the man who wrote those words I just quoted, while running for president in 1800, he hired a reporter who wrote that his opponent, John Adams, had both male and female sex organs. Can't make this stuff up. So American politics hasn't always lived up to the unity mentioned in our founding documents. But we are becoming more polarized. The divisiveness that was once previously reserved for politicians has begun to spread to the American people. As you can see, negative views of the opposing party have increased significantly over the last 20 years. In addition, the American people are becoming more polarized ideologically. As you can see, in 1994, most Democrats and most Republicans held moderate views. But in the last 20 years, those views have become significantly more extreme. Worst of all, polarization is beginning to affect how we see our fellow citizens. This graph shows that a significant number of Republicans and Democrats believe it would be easier or harder to get along with a neighbor depending on their political party. And this trend gets worse amongst those who are more politically engaged. These trends hurt our country and make our government less effective. They also hurt relationships. So what is causing this shift? Well, one thing is that politicians have changed their messaging. It's hard to say when exactly things started to change or who was the first to start, but it doesn't matter anyways. It wasn't one person or one side, it was many. And the basic change was this. Politicians began to recognize the power of fear in morality. They began to change the way they talked. Instead of saying the other side's ideas and policies are bad, they began to say that the other side's values and morals are bad for this country. They realized that if they could make you hate the other side, or convince you that they have bad intentions, then there is no way you would ever sit out an election. So campaigns have become more and more focused on how bad the other side is. The other large cause of polarization is changes in the media. With the growth of social media and cable news networks, we now have many options in order to choose where we get our news from. And media outlets no longer need to appeal to a broad audience in order to be successful. We are now getting our news from different sources who frame issues in different ways. And usually, we gravitate towards outlets that confirm what we already believe. So instead of everyone getting their news from similar sources with little bias, we are getting our news from different sources and often from very biased sources. And that makes it harder to get along. In addition, because news media has become more fragmented, it has also become more sensationalized as outlets compete for viewers. I'm sure all of you have noticed that it seems, at least, that the most outrageous stories seem to make the news, and the more common stories are pushed aside. If a politician wants to get press coverage, they'll be a lot more successful making divisive and polarizing comments. Another issue is the fast-paced culture we live in. We often want our information to be simple and fast, so news articles and updates become tweets and headlines. Complex issues can be misconstrued, especially when they're boiled down. Important factors can be cut out, and when we don't know the whole story, opposing viewpoints often seem more radical and harmful than they actually are. So that's just a small overview of why polarization is happening. Now, how do we fix it? First instinct might be to get angry and blame the politicians and media executives. And that's understandable. They should change. But we should also recognize that their actions are, to a large extent, reflective of what we value. If those actions were not effective, they wouldn't do them. Unity isn't an issue that can be fixed with one simple policy, or by punishing a few, or by a new president. It's a change that has to happen at an individual level, in the minds of every American. A change in the way we think, the way we see the world, what we prioritize, what matters to us. In the past, it was easier to retain the unity that is at the heart of our country. But our society has become more complex, and it is easier to divide us now than it ever has been. Now, more than ever, our thoughts and our attentions are pulled in 1,000 different directions. And it can be easy to go about life angry about everything and discouraged by every shocking headline or soundbite. I know I felt that way many times. I've let the negativity and divisiveness get to me. And I don't like feeling that way. And I've seen the damage that it has done. So I'd like to leave you with some ideas about what we can do to help change things. The first is vote. Everybody should vote, but don't just vote. Think about unity and bipartisanship when you vote. If a candidate doesn't commit to work across the aisle, or if they haven't in the past, think twice before you give them your vote. It is especially important to vote in primaries, where turnout is lower and only the most polarized citizens vote. Primaries are also important because, to be honest, I don't expect anyone to vote against a member of their own party just because the other candidate doesn't talk as much about unity, or because their candidate doesn't talk as much about unity. In primaries, you can vote for a candidate of your own party who is committed to maintaining unity. Another thing that's important to do is recognize. When we listen to someone we agree with, though we may trust what they have to say and agree with their ideas, it is important to recognize that they have incentives to mislead. When we listen to politicians, it is important to remember that we are getting a biased viewpoint. Another thing to do is be slower to judgment. As I mentioned earlier, news has become more trivial. And with the growth of social media, issues are often boiled down to 140 characters. But domestic and foreign policies can be very complex. And when we make up our minds about an issue after just a tweet or a 2-minute video, we often fail to see the other side and the reasonable arguments that may support that side. Another thing we can do is don't click or watch, as in don't click on articles that make outrageous claims or that are clearly written in an attempt to polarize you. And don't watch news shows that are exceptionally sensationalized. This one seems pretty obvious, but it's important. If we stop reading and watching that material, then people will stop producing it. Now, these are just a few ideas. The important thing is that we think about unity in our daily lives. We need to see ourselves as Americans first, and members of a political party second. And we need to see the value in each other, and strive to work together. We all say we love our country, but we cannot truly love our country if we don't love our fellow countrymen and women. Thank you.